Acta gratu!
Salary, the scar?
Here.
Hello again, it's me, TST Talks, and I'm talking about Star Wars again, which actually went surprisingly well last time. If you've seen that video, which you should, this is a sequel to that video, and also it's just a good video all around, you will remember that I said that the second part would eventually come. And I was not lying to you, even though it's been a year since that video came out. Part of that is just because I have a lot on my plate, but another part is that originally I was planning for this to only be 2 parts. Part 1 being about the movies, and part 2 being about the Disney Plus shows. But I realized that that was not balanced at all, so I've split up this part 2 into 2 parts. So overall, this series will be a trilogy. Very appropriate for Star Wars, wow. Part 2, this video, will be all about the live-action Disney Plus shows, like The Mandalorian and Andor. Part 3 will be about animated Disney Plus shows like The Bad Batch and Visions. And then when I'm done with all of those videos, I will take them together and edit them all into a big giant video about Disney Star Wars era as a whole, and then I'll find the Holy Grail. And of course, I want to once again give a disclaimer for this. First of all, and most importantly, these are all opinions. You can dislike the stuff I like the stuff I dislike, and the world will not end. Because of this, you are completely free to disagree with me in the comments. In fact, I encourage it. However, a fair warning, I know how nasty stuff surrounding Star Wars on the internet and in general can get, so don't be a bigoted dick and I won't remove your comment. Cool? Cool. Alright, moving on to the actual meat of this video.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
Over the past 4 years, Jesus Christ, Star Wars has entered a new phase. The phase of the quote-unquote smaller screen. After the horrific critical reception of The Rise of Skywalker and general fandom dissatisfaction with a lot of the sequel trilogy, the movie department has pretty much screeched to a halt. We've seen headline after headline about Star Wars movies entering production with new creatives at the helm, only to get canceled, postponed, or just never heard from again. It seems that Disney and Lucasfilm have lost faith in the movie-making department, or to be more accurate, in the guarantee of those movies to turn a profit. So they've shifted direction, focusing their movie-making skills onto another avenue, TV shows. From The Mandalorian to the Book of Boba Fett to Andor, the people in the early 2020s have always had a new live-action Star Wars thing to talk about. And talk about them we have, as demonstrated by this video's very existence. There is a lot of debate around these shows, and their range in quality, tone, and scope have created a lot of discourse over the future of the franchise. But I'm not really here to dip my toes into that debate much. I just want to share my own thoughts about these shows because, well, I set out to do this series about a year ago, and I am a completionist. That is the honest answer, to be frank. Enough waffling though, let's jump right into it with and here we are, off to a very strong start. The Mandalorian is kind of legendary because it not only kicked off this new era of Star Wars, it not only kicked off the entirety of Disney Plus as a streaming service, it didn't even only invite the renaissance of Pedro Pascal's career. It's just also pretty damn good. If you don't know, the basic premise of the show is that there are these people in Star Wars called the Mandalorians, who before this show the general public knew mostly as the guys that Boba Fett's dad was a part of. Yes, I know they're a part of Clone Wars and Rebels, but the general public isn't really big on those shows, which is a point I'll get into more later. Most people just saw the movies, so that's what I'm working with. The point is, they're a religious sect, or to be more accurate, a group of religious sects, that originate on the planet Mandalore. There are a lot of shenanigans involving various Mandalorian rules and customs, but the most important one that you need to know is that they cannot take off their helmet in front of other people lest they become an apostate. The show, The Mandalorian, is specifically about a Mandalorian, shocker, I know, named Din Djarin, who uses his Mandalorian warrior training to find a career as a bounty hunter in the post-Return of the Jedi / Fallen Empire era of Star Wars. It's a cold and brutal life, and it suits Djarin, or Mando as he's often called, pretty well. However, things take a turn when he's given a job that entails capturing and delivering an unexpected target, and the decisions that he makes afterwards that put him in new and complex situations. So to come right out of the gate, season 1 is definitely the best season of the show, and one of the best seasons of Star Wars TV made thus far. And the main reason for that position, and why it's made such a splash in pop culture when it arrived, was that it was different from what Star Wars was putting out at the time. Need I remind you, the first season of The Mandalorian came out the same year as... That is a bit of an outlier, but it's true that Star Wars had become known for larger-than-life, fantastical, almost operatic drama and stakes. And while those stakes were by no means the main problem that people have with the franchise, they had become a bit stale. The Mandalorian did something a bit different. It lowered those stakes. Similar to how Rogue One lowered the stakes from saving the galaxy to getting the Death Star plans, The Mandalorian lowered the stakes from saving the galaxy to saving the merchandisable character, child. It feels different and personal and a lot more real, doing a lot of work to help make the Star Wars world feel more lived in. A perfect example of this, I think, is the 4th episode of this season, where a small town is under siege by Gina Carano. No, wait. This town is under siege by a group of raiders, and they have a weapon. An abandoned AT-ST, or those little walker guys. This is perfect because in the original context where the AT-ST was introduced, it was a small part of an invading army that the good guys took care of pretty easily and rather comically. In this lower stakes environment, however, it's an elevated threat, and through the framing, it becomes genuinely a lot more menacing. This is the kind of stuff that The Mandalorian does really well. The other big thing that I liked about this show is its episodic nature. Obviously, there is an overarching serial plot, but that's only really focused in the first few and last 2 episodes, which is technically a majority of the show, but whatever. All of the stuff in between is these pretty cool, almost standalone episodes that do a lot of work to help further that idea of fleshing out the Star Wars universe. It feels like watching a Western show just in space. My favorite episode this season is one of these episodes, that being episode 6, where Mando meets up with some old crewmates to fulfill a rescue mission. There's just such a palpable sense of shared history between these characters, and the episode does a great job of putting you in Mando's shoes and allowing you to feel how uncomfortable he is. And the sequence where Mando is taking them out all one by one, badass, and he didn't kill any of them. Plus, this episode is written by Kristofer Yost, the creator of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and a writer for Thor Ragnarok, which was a nice surprise. But not that you need the great writing to get that sense of discomfort from Mando. Pedro Pascal, while also being an object of attraction and thirst from much of the internet, myself included, is a successful actor for a reason. And he does such great voice acting and at times physical acting that it makes up for him not showing his face for 99.9% of the runtime. I know that he wasn't always the one in the suit, but apparently he is in it pretty often, so I'll give him some credit for that. In terms of other Mando character things, I find how they handled his anti-droid biases in this season really interesting. The state of droids in this universe is complex, and trust me, we will get back to that with this show specifically. But in this season, the storyline is handled pretty well, I think. We start with Mando not liking droids at all, to the point where he'll refuse to get into land speeders piloted by them, but then he spends all this time with IG-11, and we see him genuinely grow warm to him until he is upset at the prospect of IG-11's death.
We need you. Let's just come up with
Please tell me the child will be safe in your care. If you do so, I can default to my secondary command.
But you'll be destroyed.
And you will live, and I will have served my purpose.
No, we need you.
There's nothing to be sad about. I've never been alive.
I'm not sad.
Yes, you are. I'm a nurse droid. I've analyzed your voice.
It's an interesting examination of growth, plus relatable, because IG-11 is pretty charming for essentially a walking street lamp. That's another thing, actually. A lot of the characters in this show are pretty fun. In fact, with only one notable exception, all of the side characters are endearing in their own way. Queel the Ugnaught is instantly iconic with his unique view on things and his
I have spoken.
catchphrase. Amy Sedaris's junkyard character is very reminiscent of your favorite, slightly overbearing aunt, complete with hyperactive cousin stand-ins. Emily Swallow as the armorer has a pretty similar talent to Pedro Pascal, invoking a seemingly effortless screen presence with only her voice. Hell, even this rookie bounty hunter guy from episode 5 is pretty fun to hang around. And of course, Giancarlo Esposito steals every scene that he's in.
You have something I want.
That may be a meme, but my god if it still doesn't serve. Of course, if there's one thing that needs mentioning when it comes to this show, it's the one thing that comes to mind whenever people mention the merchandising. The child. Or as he's more commonly and colloquially known, Baby Yoda. There's not really much to say here. In this season, he's basically just a plot device to keep Mando busy and motivated to defy his clan, the Bounty Hunters Guild, and the remains of the Empire, which is fair. He is pretty cute. Oh, look at him scarf down that frog while it's still living. Baby Yoda's presence in the show is also the only real representative of the larger, more mystical part of Star Wars lore that we're a lot more familiar with, which in addition to the lower stakes environment that I mentioned, makes the Jedi, a cornerstone of this franchise from the very beginning, feel more like an exciting new and unknown to the world, taking advantage of this idea of the everyman in the Star Wars universe. Plus the plotline of the remnants of the Empire experimenting on Baby Yoda to try to clone Force users directly leads to the stuff in Rise of Skywalker, actively working to make that wild plotline actually make sense. And while, as you know, I'm decidedly not a fan of that movie, I always appreciate work being done to make the universe more coherent with itself. Plus it pisses off those fandom menace grifters that are always trying to claim that the sequels are not canon, which is just really funny to me. And just because I wanted to mention it, there isn't a lot of comedy in this season since it's mostly an action drama type beat, but the comedy is really good when it shows up. This scene between the two stormtroopers is just gold. I don't care if it's lore inaccurate, it's funny as shit, and that is what matters. But yeah, overall, that's The Mandalorian Season 1. It's a pretty great season of television and overall a very solid start to the Disney Plus TV era. With this foundation, the creators over at Lucasfilm had a very good jumping off point to realize some interesting potential and create some genuinely great Star Wars content. Now, did they succeed at that? Well... Okay, so it was better than I remembered. The Mandalorian Season 2 has an interesting place in the history of live-action Disney Plus shows because, while it was very good, it had a few red flags for problems that would plague the future shows in this category, but I'll get there in a minute. Focusing on the actual season itself, this is very much the second season of the great show we had last season. The season starts off incredibly strong, with the cold open of episode 1 being, in my opinion, pretty much perfectly written. If I were to introduce someone to the show, I'd probably use this cold open to showcase it even more than I would the very first scene of the show overall, as iconic as that opening is. And that for the most part extends to the rest of the episode. The plotline of a small town being terrorized by an outside force and the protagonist having to take care of them in return for goods is very Western gunslinger. The sheriff character played by Timothy Oliphant is genuinely fantastic. He's very simple, but he has this great presence and I just love his whole vibe. Just a chill guy all around. I hope we see more of him in the future. And the episode even features Boba Fett's armor. That's cool. Very mysterious how it got there. I'm sure there will be a very cool backstory for how that happened. And those compliments that I had for the last season extend to this one. The mix of episodic and serialized storytelling is cool, the side characters are still fun and interesting, and the show still feels like its own little corner away from the main saga, for the most part. We'll get to that too. This season continues to flesh out the universe of Star Wars with one of my favorite things in the series: weird alien stuff. Pretty much the entirety of episode 3 with the frog lady and her eggs, as well as the snow planet with all the spider things, is just peak pulp sci-fi shenanigans, and I absolutely love it. And the less silly explorations of lore are cool too. My favorite episode this season was episode 7, when Mando and Bill Burr's character are reunited and go undercover in an Imperial base. It explores the colonialist nature of the Empire and the effects of what existing within that system does to a person, and ends up with them blowing up the fascist guy and his whole base. Nice. Now, if only there was a show that had this entire spirit throughout. That'll never happen. This is Disney we're talking about. Anyway, this season does a lot of good with what they did in the previous season and expanded upon that in interesting ways. However, they also included a new element, which is something that I have slightly more complex feelings about. And that element is, as you may have already guessed, the incorporation of previous characters and/or plot elements from other Star Wars media. The most obvious example, barring one very notable exception, is the inclusion of Boba Fett and Boba Fett's armor in the storyline. Boba Fett is one of the most recognizable characters in Star Wars, even if he didn't play as much a role in the original movies as many people like to pretend. Nevertheless, out of all the choices of iconic Star Wars characters, Boba Fett was the most natural fit for this show. As I mentioned before, Mandalorians previously were primarily known for their relationship to Boba and his dad Jango, so bringing him into a show about Mandalorian culture is a pretty natural fit. It's fairly easy to justify in-universe too. Mando is searching for Mandalorians, he follows up a tip about a man in Mandalorian armor, recovers Boba's armor from another man, and Boba finds him and gets his armor back. Eternal debt, blah blah blah, bingo bango, Boba has now joined the party. It makes sense, and they give him some cool stuff to do, particularly within the action scenes that he's in. It's a bit fan servicey, but it works. The other Mandalorian inclusion in this show also works fairly well for the most part. Bo-Katan is a character in the Clone Wars TV show that has made her first live action appearance with this show. And considering that she is apparently a huge part of Mandalorian canon and the larger Star Wars franchise from what I'm told, it makes sense that she would be given at least a nod in the show called The Mandalorian. And I assume it's a great moment for Clone Wars fans. I'm put in a bit of an awkward situation, however, because in case you couldn't tell, I haven't watched Clone Wars, or at least I haven't watched the vast majority of the show. I have watched the movie. But the show is on my list, I promise. And I plan to watch it before the next part of this series so that I can, properly review its 7th series, which was a Disney Plus original. But I want to focus on how my experience as someone who hasn't watched it affects my watching the live action shows, because I feel like it's a worthy perspective to consider. For example, take the episode focusing on Ahsoka Tano. If you're a big Clone Wars fan, I'm sure this moment was huge for you. Like with Bo-Katan, this was seeing a previously only animated character in live action, which is pretty cool. However, for me, she was just a Jedi. One that had a pretty cool design and lightsabers, but not that I really had any attachment to. I was able to understand that episode well enough because, honestly, it could really just be any Jedi in the role and the episode would have still worked. But then you get things like this.
Now tell me, where is your master? Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
That I'm sure was like a big name drop reveal, but for me it's honestly the point where I started relating to Mando the most in this show, because all this stuff is going on, the dude has a real, I don't know, I just got here type energy. And I really felt that, That's a whole issue that I will get into more later, but it's something to keep in mind. Going back to the original parts of the show, Gideon's entire plotline is excellent. I love that they're continuing his plan to clone Force-sensitive beings from Baby Yoda.
Grogu.
That's his name.
Oh, sorry. Grogu, who, speaking of which, continues to have a lot of actual character for a baby. I mean, mischievous little scamp isn't exactly the most original personality you could have for a child character, but it's popular for a reason. And they do a lot of work to make the dynamic between him and Mando feel fun and heartfelt, which I feel is something that a lot of old gruff man cares for. Small child narratives don't necessarily do all the time. Examples that feature Pedro Pascal seem to do well enough though. The finale episode of this season where they're parting ways and Mando takes off his helmet to let Grogu see his face, something he hasn't done completely willingly for any living being since his childhood, is Someone chopping onions in here? Whew. This really is a great ending to this season and provides an excellent springboard for these two characters to grow on their own, separately. So nice. Now, is there anything else I should talk about with this finale? Well, I'm not sure there's a whole lot else to mention, so let's... Oh, right. That. So I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it's nice to see Luke again, and his whole fight with the droids is very cool. Plus, having Grogu be a part of his Jedi school is a great setup for the ending of this season. Other than that, though, I don't like that this whole scene gave a bunch of the The Last Jedi people a bunch of ammo to be like, see, this is what Luke should be like. Dave Filoni is decanonizing sequel Luke. Which just... I don't even have the energy to address how stupid a line of thinking that is. Also, maybe this is just because I'm speaking from a late 2023 perspective and current events are happening. But seeing the AI voice clone and deepfake stuff for this is just very unnerving and unsettling, knowing the problems that this is causing in entertainment as we speak. Plus, it's just unsettling and unnerving on its own here because of the whole uncanny valley thing. But I don't know, I guess it doesn't affect my enjoyment too much. Like I said, conflicted feelings. Overall though, this season is still quite good, even if it has a couple of issues bogging down its runtime. The Mandalorian Season 2 lives up to the previous season, laying out a bright future for this era of Disney Star Wars. You know where I'm going with this. Yeah, welcome to the new room. Probably won't use this again for a little while since it's uncharacteristically cold today. And even then, already still pretty warm in here. Anyway, what are we talking about? Oh, right. Oh. So, the Book of Boba Fett. Easily the most show of all time. This was the show that I was looking forward to talking about the least, for what I hope are obvious reasons.
Like a panther. Yes?
But it's a surprisingly tragic story, at least for me, because I was actually pretty excited for this show when it came out. Remember, this was during the peak of Mandalorian hype, and the Book of Boba Fett was being made by the, at the time, untouchable duo of Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. And it seemed like a safe bet to be excited because they had given us Mando Seasons 1 and 2, which I just spent the last however many minutes talking about how much I liked. And this came out just a year after the end of Mandalorian Season 2, promising a new era of fun Star Wars content. What happened, guys? This show is almost cartoonishly bad, and not in the fun way. I'm not having fun, in case you couldn't tell. I felt myself melting into a puddle of despondent goo at the prospect of just writing about this show, and I feel similarly about talking about it. As I've stated many times before, I am not a fan of needlessly hating on something. I feel as though I have to clarify that a lot, but it's true. And I want people to know about it because it means that when I dislike something enough to talk about it, that means I really do dislike it. So, you know, it makes sense that at least 2 pieces of Star Wars media fall under that category. Unlike The Rise of Skywalker though, I don't feel like nearly enough people talk about how bad the show is as much as they should, in my opinion. So I feel justified going into a lot of detail about how much I dislike it. I took a lot of notes while watching this series, more than the previous 2 seasons of Mandalorian combined. I probably won't incorporate all or even most of them, but there's definitely a lot of material to get through, so let's just get started. But before I bellyache about how this show makes me feel as though the world could end tomorrow and I'd be totally fine with that, let's actually talk about the good qualities of the show. There is one thing that I do genuinely really like about this show. The score. The theme song for this show is genuinely pretty cool. It was so fun that it gave me a reason other than my own self-hatred to watch the end of every episode so that I could hear it in the credits. It was like a light at the end of each dark and depressing tunnel. Man, I'm getting really dramatic about this show, aren't I? It also seems as though through a potential mishap in costume design, this show may have given us a trans Twi'lek person. Is that how you say it? Twi'lek? Twi'lek? I don't know. You don't know who Twi'leks are? Here you go, it's these guys. Long story short, apparently the shape of their big ear things indicates whether they're biologically male or female. And this guy here has got some quote-unquote female cones. Probably accidental, being 100% honest, but even so, it is pretty cool to see some rep for trans people in the universe of Star Wars. That was a nice section. Moving on to the bad. This show's premise is really weird. So essentially, Boba Fett, bounty hunter extraordinaire, has decided to give up bounty hunting and instead usurp the crime lord throne that was previously Jabba the Hutt's. and establish a regime based on respect instead of fear. A regime that he gained control of by murdering the previous leader of the regime and taking it by force. So, sure, there are no inconsistencies here, what are you talking about? But it's a somewhat workable premise for a show, especially when you give the plotline of a rival crime organization trying to muscle in on Boba Fett's territory. Except actually the other half of the show is preoccupied with a flashback to Boba Fett's past following the events of Return of the Jedi and leading up to the events of The Mandalorian Season 2. During this storyline, we see Boba's relationship with a group of Tusken Raiders who enslave him but then befriend him. Okay, but with that plotline and the main storyline, that is a bit of a tight squeeze, but if the screen time is shared properly, it'll probably work out. Oh, no, wait, there's a third plotline, all about the Mandalorian, continuing his plotline from his show, The Mandalorian, in multiple episodes that are almost completely disconnected from the main show. And there are only 7 episodes of the show in total? Yeah, no, this seems like a flawless plan. Let's talk about that Tusken plotline though, because it's the first plotline that we're introduced to in the show, and it honestly does have some redeeming qualities. Overall, I think it's a good idea for a show about Boba Fett to follow the aftermath of his most iconic moment, falling into a giant orifice. Most of the stuff that has to deal with this plotline in the first episode is genuinely really intriguing, and it feels like a new and interesting direction to take a character like Boba Fett in. It's also just really cool to see a race like the Tuskens get developed a lot more, something that the second season of The Mandalorian also did, because the way that the Tuskens have been portrayed in their original context is questionable, but seeing them developed more as an actual culture and society, even on a small scale, is really cool. And allowing Boba to find community with them is a really intriguing idea that is fascinating to watch unfold in the first episode. After that, it starts to lose a little bit of its luster.
A lizard. Thank you. I'm sorry. I think I swallowed it.
Earlier I praised The Mandalorian for leaning into the Western genre, and this show does that too, just worse. I just don't understand how they managed to have a train heist, one of the most exciting staples of the Western genre, and they made it boring. So boring, my god. They have blaster shots and train fights and everything, and it all just amounts to nothing, really. Like, for comparison, there is a train heist in Breaking Bad, a show that also takes some pretty obvious cues from westerns. That is far less epic in scale, it doesn't even have any action, but it's still far more tense because of how much lead up and investment there is. And I know that comparing Breaking Bad to this show is like being upset that a baby can't outrun an Olympic sprinter, but still. Anyway, this whole plotline ends up in the Tuskens getting killed by a random criminal organization that was definitely not the criminal organization that they just robbed. That's an actual plot twist. As signified by this symbol, which looks a little odd, right? You can see how it looks a lot like 2 handless arms bent together in a show of solidarity. Obviously, nothing else. What did you think I was saying? The rest of this era of the timeline is pretty minimal, mostly just showing Boba Fett saving Fennec Shand after the events of Mando Season 1, and then just like a vague lead up into Season 2. It's a plotline that feels like it started out really promising, but then just became nothing by the end. Or not even by the end, but more just the end of the first third. And as you may have guessed, the central plot arc of this show is not much better.
Lord Fett offers the gift of your leave unmolested.
Hold on, what? I mentioned that the premise of this show is really weird. All that we're really given is that Boba Fett wants to be a crime lord instead of a bounty hunter, which he's been all his life, and wants to rule Jabba's domain with respect. And we're not really given a reason as to why? Boba Fett just repeats this mission statement over and over to anyone who asks and rarely goes into much detail. It's implied through some dialogue that he wants to do it this way because living with the Tuskens changed his outlook, but we don't really see that either. I really don't understand how living with a cool little community of desert hermits makes someone want the high social ranking and responsibility of running an entire crime empire. I get the change in outlook part, I just don't understand how it translates to this, and thus I don't really feel like I can get properly invested. It doesn't help that the first half of this plotline is devoted to what I can only call random shenanigans. One thing I do like about this show is that it has flashes that are oddly cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is an aesthetic that I've always appreciated, and I do feel like it could get a lot more love. However, its use in this show is sorely lacking, as demonstrated by this whole subplot in an episode where Boba Fett goes to sort out some teen cyberpunk hooligans and ends up recruiting them. That's as far as it goes. They don't really do anything else besides stand around Boba sometimes and then do some unnecessary spins in that Avengers ass of finale. Oh, we'll get to that finale, don't you fret. There are also a few weird tangents that the show goes about using. The first few episodes are dedicated to Boba maintaining and fostering his relationships with other people of importance in the area, namely other crime lords and the mayor of Mos Espa, the neighboring town to his palace, I guess. This includes a plotline where Jabba the Hutt's relatives come to assess Boba Fett or something. The first thing you'll notice about them is that they're very intertwined in the most literal sense of the word, which is a bit odd, but then becomes a lot odder when you realize that they're apparently supposed to be twin siblings. And that's just something that is never acknowledged, so I can only assume the implication is that these two twin siblings have some kind of weird relationship going on. Man, what is with this show and having weird sexual undertones? Of course, though, the main villain couldn't be any of the characters that were set up in the first few episodes of this 7-episode show. It has to be another new criminal organization that is trying to take over this territory in order to traffic and sell weird psychedelic spice that is an opiate stand-in. It's just the spice from Dune. It's just the spice from Dune. I thought we were past the blatant ripoff of Dune's existence phase of Star Wars. Good Lord. Anyway, the name of the criminal organization that Boba Fett is fighting is the Pike Syndicate, which is a name that feels too close to a slur in multiple directions, but whatever, okay. The only thing mildly redeeming about these guys in the shows is that their prosthetics slash animatronics are pretty cool, I guess. But as actual characters and or plot devices, they do absolutely nothing for me. For one thing, they're not at all intimidating. The whole conceit of these characters is that they're supposed to be the ever-present and terrifying threat that could strike Boba and his crew at any time. But they more so come across as laughably incompetent, which the snail's pace choreography does not help at all. There's also the fact that they don't really do anything that makes them feel threatening within the narrative, which is really impressive considering they allegedly killed all the Tuskens that Boba was with. And then they blew up this diner slash brothel that was in the first episode. Don't really feel anything, but it is kinda sad though that this went away because that's where the trans Twi'lek worked. Rest in peace, King. There's something else that these guys did. Something I just can't quite put my finger on.
Do you know where you are, gentlemen? Think it through.
Oh, hey, it's Timothy Oliphant. Aw, man, it's so nice to see a friendly face around here. Maybe he'll help the show in some way. Oh. So that's how it's going to be. To be fair to the Pikes, they didn't directly kill him. They sent another bounty hunter to kill him. Hey, wait a minute, who the f*** is this guy? No, I'm kidding. Of course I know who this guy is. It's Rattlesnake Jake. But I should reiterate, I watched this as someone who has no prior knowledge with Clone Wars or Rebels, so my reaction wasn't really far off from that when I first saw this character, who I would come to know as Cad Bane. A character that generally seems like he was pretty cool in another show. Not this one, though. This is another problem with Book of Boba Fett. It has far too many cameos for its own good. There's Cod Bone, as I mentioned already, but you also have the Hutts and this evil Wookiee guy who is apparently from something. The Pike Syndicate is apparently a villainous organization from the Clone Wars. You got Ahsoka again. You got Luke again, which is a whole nother can of worms, which we'll get to very soon. And even Mando and Grogu, yet again. The problem here is that they don't put effort into the cameo usage. The show draws from so many disparate parts of Star Wars canon for its story, and it seems to rely on the audience being familiar with all of these elements and connecting with those elements in order to artificially create care for the show's plot, instead of I don't know, developing original characters like Fennec Shand, who is really nothing more than Boba's bodyguard in this show. And maybe it's just because I didn't watch those shows, so it's more obvious, but I feel like a lot of other people picked up on this too. It kind of made this a show where you have to watch the Clone Wars as supplemental material first. Now I can already hear people typing away in the comments. Well, TSD, a lot of people watch the Clone Wars as kids, and if you should have as a kid too, so really you are the one at fault here and not the show. Maybe you should have watched the Clone Wars before you watched this show, you And to that I say, let's talk about target audience and expectations. This show is a spin-off of The Mandalorian, a show that in turn was marketed as its own thing away from the main franchise fare of the Star Wars, franchise to general audience members. The Clone Wars is a show that was marketed to kids about 15 years ago. There isn't a lot of overlap between those two markets besides the fact that they're both Star Wars fans, presumably. Now, it's one thing to make a show like The Bad Batch, which I'm given to understand is more of a sequel series to The Clone Wars that has similar animation and story conventions and expecting people to have seen The Clone Wars for, and it's another to expect people to have seen The Clone Wars for this. To be clear, I'm not one of those people who will say, why should I watch an animated kids show? I'm a grown-up adult. There's no possible benefit I could find from this. But it does show a sizable amount of disregard for the people watching as a showrunner, because there will be a sizable amount of people, perhaps a majority of your market, who will watch this show and have no idea who these guys are. And if your strategy is to bank on their nostalgic appeal or on the audience's pre-knowledge of their character arcs, that unfamiliarity is going to be a bit of a problem. But enough yapping about the Clone Wars, let's talk about the other show that intrudes onto this show's runtime. And far more egregiously, I might add. I will admit, rewatching the Mandalorian episodes of this show, it was a nice change of pace. It's clear that it was much more comfortable for the writers to be writing for Mando and his cast of characters, and to be 100% honest with you, I don't know why this wasn't just The Mandalorian Season 3 to begin with. These episodes of the show are easily the best and most watchable, and are a welcome distraction from the rest of the show. But I think that these episodes are what doomed this show and are basically emblematic of the fall of everything that Filoni and Favreau worked towards. Without even getting into the content of these episodes, the decision to dedicate 2 episodes of a 7-episode show to an entirely different show's cast of characters and stories and vibe and setting and everything, it's basically just episodes of The Mandalorian, is absolutely catastrophic for not only the structure of the main show, but also for the audience's investment level in the other story that you're telling. Not that, everything going on here was incredibly compelling storytelling or anything, but from a storytelling perspective, it's a pretty terrible move, and it's emblematic of the fact that it's clear the showrunners didn't really care about the story that they were telling. And as for the content of these episodes, it's not really gonna win any awards either. The stuff about Mando being an unreluctant apostate and wanting to reunite with Grogu is fine. The building of the new ship is fine. And generally the first of these 2 episodes is just fine. It's fine. It's a bit below the standards of the previous 2 Mando seasons, but for this show, it's great. The second episode is where more issues start to show up. Story-wise, I just cannot express how much I hate that Grogu goes back to Mando so soon. It technically happens in the next episode, but all the buildup and stuff is in this one, so I'm counting it. I already talked about how emotionally resonant the ending of the 2nd season of The Mandalorian was, and it's all just completely whisked away in a alleged spin-off show, just so that Disney can continue to have Baby Yoda keychains sold in promotion for the new Mandalorian season. It's just reverting to the status quo in a way that completely undercuts the wonderful ending of the previous season, and it just completely cripples any possibility of The Mandalorian having any forward momentum going forward, which is a problem that will become apparent very soon. And on a much more real note, I'm going to address the uncanny elephant in the room. AI Luke fucking sucks, okay? It's less noticeable in the end of Mando, but in this show, he has a whole episode pretty much to himself, and it shows that he has all of the charm and humanity of a cardboard cutout.
Sometimes I wonder if his heart is in it.
So much like your father.
I feel so bad for Rosario Dawson in that scene. It makes me think of Ian McKellen breaking down on the set of The Hobbit because he didn't have anyone to act across from.
It was so distressing and off-putting and difficult that I thought, I don't want to make this film if this is what I'm going to have to do.
Here's hoping that she gets to interact with actual people in her own show. And of course, I hate what AI Luke stands for. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's currently a historic Screen Actors Guild strike going on right now. One of the core reasons that they're going on this strike is to protect against the use of AI to replace actors like this. So not only is this incredibly off-putting to watch, it's super unethical. As is pretty much any iteration of using CG or AI to reanimate the corpses of old dead actors. I know that Mark Hamill is still alive, but he wasn't involved in this. That's not his voice or his body. Not his real voice or body anyway. It's just, it's so bad. It's so bad. Okay. Let's calm down here a little bit. I've been ranting about the show for longer than some of my actual videos on my channel, so let's just wrap it up in the most fitting way possible, by talking about the finale episode.
Before you get any ideas, I've got back shooters too.
Damn. Didn't know he was into that kind of thing. Honestly, there's just not much to say here. 75% of the finale episode is just a mindless battle with Boba Fett and his crew versus the Pike Syndicate, plus Claude Rain. There's shooting, punching, spinning, the works, and it's just really not worth putting in the effort to dissect how uninteresting it is. A couple of highlights. Mando and Grogu reunite, which you already know my feelings on. Boba Fett rides a Rancor. That's kind of interesting. Oh, there's this infamous moment, which I've alluded to already, where one of the cyberpunk kids spins unnecessarily before taking a shot. Honestly, that's kind of camp. I love it. People give that too much shit. It's kind of silly in a very fun way, which is something that this show desperately needs. And of course, Cat Brain dies, going out pretty pathetically, to be honest. I'm sure the people who watched him in other shows were very satisfied with this conclusion here. Grogu stops a rampaging Rancor with the move straight out of How to Train Your Dragon, and now Boba is respected by the community. The Pikes all get assassinated, and Mando rides off with Grogu to have a mediocre third season. And now the nightmare is finally over. Honestly, after what I just experienced, I sincerely doubt that anything could be worse than that. You know what? I stand by what I said. Hello, it got hot again, so I'm back here. This is where I get controversial. In my time reflecting on these shows, I found that while there is a lot of discussion around them, and to a certain extent discourse, there's not nearly as much discourse, trademarked, as there has been with any of the recent Marvel projects, for example. Outside of stuff like Gina Carano being fired for being an anti-Semite, The Mandalorian hasn't really faced any culture war backlash. And while people did not like Book of Boba Fett, it wasn't because it was accused of being woke, which is a bit of a surprise considering how malleable that word can be. And while Andor was far and away the most overtly political show, it seems as though none of the actual culture war people watched it. But there was one notable exception to this rule, one show that was picked as a target so that the Star Wars fandom could say, don't worry, we're still racist. And that show was, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi. For those who are unaware, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a show that follows, well, Obi-Wan Kenobi, in the midpoint of the 20-year gap between his appearance in Revenge of the Sith and his appearance in A New Hope. And as you can see, there is a lot of stuff that has changed between those two, so there's a lot of fertile ground for story development if one so chooses. The actual plot of this show follows Obi-Wan being called out of exile in order to save a young Princess Leia in peril while facing down multiple demons from his past. Now earlier, I did not mean to suggest that anyone who has ever had a problem with this show, or even anyone who actively dislikes it, is racist, because, well, that's just categorically untrue. There are plenty of problems, which I will discuss here. I just wanted to put all of that out there because I have been surprised to find on my rewatch that I kinda like this show. It's not my favorite of these shows, not by a long shot, but I would say it's probably close to the middle of my overall ranking, and as such, there are good parts and bad parts. One thing that is very prevalent within the show is that it is very much a direct sequel to the events of Revenge of the Sith, which can be seen with the entire 5-minute recap of the prequel trilogy at the beginning of the first episode, as if anyone who exists online and within the Star Wars fanbase hasn't had every moment of those movies tattooed on their eyelids by online meme culture.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
That's an absolute statement. Got him. I like this because outside of one major exception, it avoids the pitfall that Boba Fett had, where it relied on people's knowledge of unrelated media to prop up its story. Kenobi is 100% built and marketed as a sequel to Revenge of the Sith, so it makes sense to draw from that story pool. It helps focus the story a little more, which is another thing that I do like about this series, the way it focuses the stakes. There is a lot of ground that the scope of the show covers, but the stakes are primarily focused on getting Leia home, and I like that. Also because it's him fulfilling his last wish to Padme that he'd protect her children. Is it the first Disney Plus Star Wars show to center around an older man traversing the galaxy while protecting a child? No, but hey, if it ain't broke. The main strength of this show is absolutely the performances. You can accuse the show of a lot of things, but the actors giving bad or half-hearted performances is not one of them. Ewan McGregor is wonderful in this as a broken and hurting Obi-Wan who doesn't really know how to go on with his life meaningfully and is ever vigilant about the threats to himself and the Skywalker kids. He does a great job of making this Obi-Wan a transitionary piece between the Obi-Wan of the prequels and the Obi-Wan of the original trilogy. It's a great performance and part of what really sells the show. Vivian Lyra Blair, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, gives one of the best performances I've ever seen from a child actor. And she just has this great charisma with everyone else and this wonderful screen presence that just makes her such a joy to watch. Hayden Christensen did really well for the approximately 10 minutes of actual FaceTime he had. I say approximately because apparently he was wearing the Darth Vader suit some of the time, or most of the time, or even just a little bit. It's kind of unclear. Anyway, he's great. And of course, I cannot talk about performances in this show without talking about the powerhouse that is Moses Ingram as Reva. She was honestly given the short end of the stick in terms of material, but she absolutely gives what she has her all, and it makes her incredibly compelling to watch. So of course, people sent her racist death threats, and sent Ewan McGregor death threats for daring to defend her from her death threats. And for some reason, people sent death threats to Vivian Lyra Blair for some reason. God, I just love being a part of this fandom. It's so cool and normal. And of course, I cannot forget the best performance of the show, that being Zach Braff as the Imperial Republican trucker who is also a mole. Show wouldn't be the same without him. I do think this show has some pretty big flaws though. Starting on the smaller end of things, while I mentioned that the show does not suffer from nearly as bad a case of what I'm going to call cameo-itis as Boba Fett does, it is still an issue here.
Hello.
Obviously, there's the big bald boy himself, the Grand Inquisitor, who I am slightly more familiar with than I am with Cad Bane. If only because I was subjected to complaints about how he wasn't 100% accurate to his cartoon proportions while the show was running. He's mostly fine in this show since he's just a background character for the real villains of Reva and Vader, and only really serves as a catalyst for Reva's involvement, but I still felt like he was worth mentioning. Looking forward to watching Rebels and actually learning more about him. But here's my thing, and I know this will be a scorching hot take, but I don't know if it was a good idea to have Darth Vader in this series the way he was. Don't get me wrong, I'm just as big a fan of Darth Vader's presentation in this show as anyone else. He's incredibly well acted and intimidating. That final confrontation in the last episode is one of the best scenes I've ever seen of the character in live action. Well, scene.
Raise the contrast just a little bit, guys. You're killing me here.
But I don't really like the fact that he's included. Disregarding the fact that James Earl Jones' voice was recreated with AI, which I already explained why I don't like in the last section, it just feels a bit weird to have Vader in this story because Reva is basically Vader. Can't wait to look at my analytics and see that as the place where people just clicked off this video in droves. But honestly, think about it. Reva is a dark side user who is powerful and motivated by trauma-induced anger. She has a similar redemption arc story, a similar single-minded obsession with Obi-Wan, and all around is someone who could easily stand in for Vader. And with how her character arc is handled in a pretty hastily done way while Vader gets the big dramatic finish, it feels like a disservice to a character that was given a very compelling start. Honestly, if the story was just changed so that Vader wasn't in it at all outside of like post-credit scene in the finale or something, and have Reva take up his role instead, it would really clean up the plot of the story. Have the Grand Inquisitor fulfill the role of a demanding authority figure instead of being fake dead for 3 episodes. Have Reva get that final confrontation, and here's the key, have Obi-Wan see Anakin in her. And through that confrontation and projection, he has the exact exact same realization about Anakin and Vader that he does in the actual show. And while at the same time, Reva is given the opportunity to be better than Anakin in that role, almost letting Obi-Wan fix his mistake and partially assuage his guilt. I honestly just feel like it would make the whole story flow a lot better, and have the added benefit of keeping their confrontation in New Hope just as meaningful by it being the first time that they've seen each other in 20 years, as was previously implied. I don't know, I'm not a script doctor, and I know this is basically just me writing fanfic for an already released show. Maybe I should get into fanfic. This is fun. But I just thought it was the best way I saw to convey the problems I have with Vader's inclusion. He kind of throws everything out of balance. On the note of things being out of balance, my other main problem with this show is that it feels like it struggles to fill the runtime of a show. Apparently, this show was based off the screenplay for a movie, specifically the first movie of a potential Obi-Wan trilogy. Which, can you imagine that? The timeline where that ended up happening must have been wild. It makes a lot of sense that this 6-hour show was originally a 2-hour movie with all the stuff that they added into the runtime. I love Kumail al-Jamil, but he really did not need to be here outside of like a one-scene cameo. Similarly, the entire refugee plotline feels like a long detour from the main plot rather than an actual inclusion in the plot. These elements work fine on their own, but honestly, the show just feels stretched with them in it. But that's just my take on Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't know. It's fine. I enjoyed rewatching it more than I thought I would, and it's definitely the second best of the pre-Andor live-action Disney Plus Star Wars shows, which, you know, there's so much competition for. Ooh, speaking of Andor. Oh my god. This video is a goddamn roller coaster. Okay, so, Andor. Where do I even begin? What do I even say that everyone hasn't said a million times already? I'm going to keep this section fairly short compared to the rest of the video because, quite frankly, I don't have a whole lot to say that hasn't already been said by other people far more eloquently. But hey, who would I be if I didn't at least try? Andor, and I feel as though I can say this without any hesitation, is one of the best, if not the best show to ever come out of Star Wars, by a long shot. I'll get around to Clone Wars, don't you worry, so that's still on the table. But until then, Andor is remaining firmly in my #1 spot. It's no contest. I suppose I should start somewhere, right? For those of you who don't know, Andor is a spin-off of the movie Rogue One, and it was created by the same creative team. It follows Cassian Andor, a regular guy in the middle of the Imperial era who gets caught up in the fight between the Empire and the beginnings of the Rebellion. The show takes place about 5 years before Rogue One, so we get to see who Cassian was before he became the committed rebel agent he was in the movie, and it's really compelling to watch. There is so much that this show does well, but I'd like to start with what every episode of this show starts with: the music. The score for this show was composed by Nicholas Britell, who you may know as the composer for Succession. Yeah, the guy that made this. Composed for Andor, a Star Wars show. And let me tell you, it definitely shows. The score is absolutely wonderful in this show. It elevates every scene that it's in while never overshadowing said scenes. It's in the playlist that I was listening to while writing this section, which also features the scores for Oppenheimer, God of War, and Deltarune. So you know it's art. And the music isn't just good, it's smartly constructed. Sideways would have a field day with this show's score. Cause yes, the opening theme is great on its own, but you may have noticed while watching that it was slightly different every episode, playing different beats or using different instruments. Well, that is because every intro is a part of a larger orchestral piece, meaning that when you layer them all on top of each other, you get this.
It's so beautiful.
I think that's a perfect intro to the level of thought that's put into this show. Andor is so well constructed. At 12 episodes, its season is twice the length of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it's far longer than even seasons of The Mandalorian, but I did not feel that length at all. This show is so well paced that I felt like I breezed right through it, even though that it is a show that is derided for having a lot of people talking scenes. I swear, Star Wars fans will complain that there isn't anything good, and then when something actually good comes along, they'll complain that it's boring and that there's too many bricks and nails. I'm just saying, if they watched to the end, they probably wouldn't complain about the bricks being boring. The show also does an excellent job with character building. Cassian is of course easier to get into as the main character, but he also has this really compelling conflict of whether he'll join the rebellion or not, even though we as the audience know where his story is headed. But it's not just Cassian. The show also takes Mon Mothma, one of the oldest characters in the franchise, with like no depth at all, and makes her story all about political maneuvering compelling as hell. A little bit of that Succession influence trickling in, I see. But Mothma, while being pretty much reinvented from the ground up, is still an establishment character. Most of these characters are completely new to the audience, with the exception of Andor himself, Saw Gerrera, and Mon Mothma. So the show doesn't have the benefit of Kenobi or the Mandalorian or... meaning that it has to actually build up its characters and make them attracted to the audience, which it does so perfectly. Marva is great as this older woman who realized way too late that she should have fought more against forces in her life than she could have. B2 is an incredibly endearing droid character who is cuter than Grogu. I said it. Nemik is only in like 3 episodes, but he's just such a pure optimist that it's contagious, and his revolutionary spirit is felt throughout the rest of the show. Dedra is this despicably compelling underdog at the Empire who you root for against her sexist colleagues until you are starkly reminded by the show what exactly it is she's fighting for. Cyril is this sniveling little weasel of a man who perfectly encapsulates a certain demographic. Luthen and Kino, I'll get to in a second. Bix is this wonderful friend who goes through hell, acted incredibly well by, and forgive me if I butcher this pronunciation, Adria Horna, an actress who has been in projects such as Good Omens and... Don't make a tired joke, 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 don't make a tired joke. Morbius. It was really morbid time for her when she got this role. But that leads me to a great point about the performances. These characters are all great, and they're highlighted by the great actors behind them. This is true for all of the characters I've previously spoken about, but it's especially true for Stellan Skarsgård as Luthen and Andy Serkis as Kino. Luthen is one of the best characters I've seen in any Star Wars thing, because he's not only really well acted, there are literally scenes of him shifting his personality on a dime that flexes his acting skills, but also so compelling as a force for positive change while being genuinely morally gray. He talks about all the sacrifices he has to make for himself and for other people in order to preserve the rebellion. His big speech, which is one of the greatest speeches in all of Star Wars, is all about this.
I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape.
You can see how the influence of this man made Cassian into the ruthless rebel he is in Rogue One. On the note of that speech though, it may be one of the best speeches in all of Star Wars, but there's an argument to be made that it's not even the best speech in that episode. That's because it's a part of what is, in my opinion, the best episode of the entire season. Season 1, Episode 10, One Way Out. It's the climax of the prison arc, where Cassian was wrongly imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit.
What do you think you're doing?
Excuse me?
You keep looking around.
Just trying to figure out what's going on.
You a part of it?
Part of what?
Don't play dumb. Look like you're sweating.
Well, it's hot.
Or you've been running.
Why would I be running?
Because you're a part of it.
Part of what? I'm a tourist.
Tourists don't run.
But I'm not running.
Cassian just get racially profiled? I could write a whole essay about how this entire arc exemplifies the malicious absurdity of the prison industrial complex and the Kafkaesque nature of everything. And if that sounds interesting, definitely check out this video by Pillar of Courage that goes into it in more detail, link in the description. But as for me, I said this would be shorter so I don't get too in depth. I'll just say that this episode is an exhilarating prison break, and it features the best acting from Andy Serkis as Kino in the whole show. His speech is what gives the prison breakers their chant, and the episode its name.
You need to help each other. We
see someone who's confused, someone who's lost. You get them moving and you keep them moving until we put this place behind us. There are 5,000 of us. If we can fight half as hard as we've been working, we will be home in no time. One way out! 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 One way out!
This is definitely the better of Serkis's two roles in the franchise. There's a bunch of other things that stood out to me, and I don't really know how to group them all together, so I'll just put them all here in this section as a kind of lightning round. I really like how the relationship between Vel and Cinta felt like a loving and committed romantic relationship, even if it's not explicitly gay. It's in the show in a way that Disney can't really cut around it because of plausible deniability, but they also can't take credit for it as a corporation. It's better rep than the 2-second kiss in The Rise of Skywalker is what I'm saying. I adore how the Empire is portrayed in this show. In most other Star Wars media, the Empire is more just this faceless and cartoonishly evil group of stormtroopers for the heroes to beat up and cut down with lightsabers, with the occasional individually evil figure like Darth Vader or Emperor Palpatine. They don't always feel like a threat, and even more rarely do they feel real. The only major previous exception was Rogue One, which I talked about in the last video. There, I said the Empire felt like an unstoppable force, and that is only expanded upon in Andor. In this show, the Empire feels like this suffocating colonialist and imperialist force that is squeezing the life out of everyone and everything in this galaxy, including its greatest believers and enforcers. It colonizes planets and drains them of their resources and cultures. It inflicts unimaginably cruel punishments on both the inhabitants of its prisons and on civilians who are being questioned. This whole screams of a dying animal torture bit was one of the most viscerally and conceptually horrifying things I've ever seen in this franchise. Bravo, Vince. But despite all of that, we see the Empire go about its business as if nothing is wrong. It's a very mundane kind of evil, and that makes it way more terrifying. And in contrast, the show's rebellion is messy and hectic, but still uplifting. The final episode is a perfect example of this, featuring a march against imperial tyranny for the sake of a funeral. We see a massive peaceful demonstration, and another one of the best speeches in Star Wars plays as Marva Andor gives her own eulogy, dedicating it to fighting the scourge of fascism in the galaxy.
It's easy for the dead to tell you to fight, and maybe it's true, maybe fighting's useless. Perhaps it's too late. But I'll tell you this. If I could do it again, I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start. Fight the Empire!
This all comes ahead to a riot, a battle that leaves many rioters dead, but also many Imperials. It doesn't fix anything. It ends an Imperial victory, but it is the biggest so far of many leaks springing from the Imperial Dam, a dam that is destined to burst. God, this show is so good! I think that's the best place to end it. I am only scratching the surface, but I do not care. I had way too much fun rewatching this show to adequately take notes for a full-on analysis. I can definitely recommend some, though. As previously mentioned, my friend Pillar of Garbage has a couple of great videos that you could watch. Jesse Gender as well. But quite frankly, Lady Knight the Braves video says everything that I love about this show, plus a lot more, honestly. For now, though, I am confident in saying that Andor is the diamond in the rough among these live-action Star Wars shows. I eagerly await Season 2. But this video is not over yet. There's just one more thing. This one's just sad, man. So going into The Mandalorian Season 3, I think it's pretty important to say that I was really excited for this season. After all, I loved the first 2 seasons, and I had no reason to think that this one would be any different. And though Andor was phenomenal, I was really thirsting for some genuinely great Star Wars content that felt more Star Warsy. You know, that space pulpy feel that the OT and the first 2 seasons had. That's why I think when this season first came out, I was in denial for a little bit, but looking back, I think that the way things turned out was kind of inevitable. Part of what made the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian work was how very focused they seemed to be. Obviously, there was a more episodic element with The Mandalorian doing the whole man with no name thing and helping out various people across the galaxy, but the whole time it always felt like it was moving towards a specific goal. There's a constant thread across the first 2 seasons that you can follow to a conclusion. That's what made the ending of Season 2 so powerful. Everything had led to it, and that is Season 3's biggest problem. During the promotional bracket for this season, Jon Favreau was quoted as saying that The Mandalorian has no series finale planned. Quote, "It's not like there's a set ending that we're building to," unquote. This is an alarming statement on its own, but it especially did not bode well for this season. Part of that was already shown by the choices they made with Mando's character in Boba Fett. Remember when I said this? It's just reverting to the status quo in a way that completely undercuts the wonderful ending of the previous season, and it just completely cripples any possibility of The Mandalorian having any forward momentum going forward, which is a problem that will become apparent very soon. You know, I think I might have been onto something there. It could not be more obvious that the showrunners do not know what they are doing this season. Everything about this season is completely unfocused, from the plot lines to the characters to even the episode runtimes. Seriously, the difference in runtime between these 2 episodes that aired one after the other is frankly absurd. But speaking specifically about the plot lines, let's talk about an example. The first main arc of the series is Din Djarin trying to become a Mandalorian again after he became an apostate by removing his helmet in front of other people in previous seasons. To do this, he has to find an absurdly remote and dangerous place to do a baptism, a place that allegedly doesn't even exist anymore. Now, this is an interesting way to facilitate character growth through the trials of finding this place. And perhaps he could grow so much as a character that he doesn't feel the need to be accepted by his tribe. This is honestly a great idea for a season-long arc, and what's that? Finding this place to baptize is super easy, barely an inconvenience, and the arc is resolved within the first 2 episodes? Cool. This season is littered with stuff like this. Cool arcs are introduced and played around with to varying shades of success, and then are usually dropped or significantly modified by the next episode, almost as if every episode is working with a new draft of the story, which, as you can imagine, makes for a very pleasant viewing experience. It really feels like a season where Filoni and Favreau were just throwing things at the wall to see what stuck, and not a lot of it stuck. One particular highlight was the 3rd and longest episode of the series, which felt like an attempt to capture the spirit of Andor, with its less action-y pacing and its focus on political commentary and intrigue, something that it was far worse at than Andor.
You know, I was almost drafted. Imagine me serving.
Oh, darling, that was the Empire.
Oh, my apologies. Empire, Rebels, New Republic, I can't keep track. That's why I should just keep my mouth shut.
We try not to get involved.
Oh yeah, real subtle, guys. Really following in George Lucas's footsteps with that dialogue. This episode was also baiting for a lot of intrigue, but ultimately didn't really go anywhere. It was a pretty simple story of betrayal that could have just as easily been told in 15 minutes as opposed to 50. And again, it barely related to anything in this season, which made it a lot harder to sit through on rewatch. Did you know that Disney Plus doesn't have speed controls, so you can't adjust the speed of the thing you're watching? I know that now. Oh, how truly do I understand that fact. Another standout episode in this season for all of the wrong reasons is the now infamous droid episode. Oh yeah, we're going there. The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 6, Guns for Hire, is notable not only because it has 2 major celebrity cameos, those being Jack Black and Kristofer Lloyd. It's also got a pretty interesting treatment of droids. See, the plotline of this episode is essentially that droids, who do all the manual labor on the planet where this takes place, have been malfunctioning. And Mando and Bo-Katan have been hired so they can figure it out and get some plot-relevant reward. It doesn't really matter for this point. Essentially, it's structured like a police procedural, with Mando and Bo-Katan going around the city investigating, which includes chasing down a droid after it ran when Mando started harassing it and then killing it, which is wow, but also going into a droid bar to figure things out. During this droid bar scene, we discover that droids are not malfunctioning on purpose. In fact, they want these malfunctions to stop. Otherwise, the people, or organics as they call them, might not let them work anymore.
We don't want to be replaced. We still have a lot to contribute. Human life is so short. They don't ask that much of us. Organics created us. It's the least we can do.
Master has given Toby a restraining bolt. I cannot believe that they use the house elves like being enslaved actually line of reasoning on Star Wars droids. The plight of droids in Star Wars is one that has been documented and discussed on this platform before in great detail. Pop Culture Detective made a great video a couple of years ago, and Nando V Movies recently made a video that went in depth on this episode specifically. So I just recommend those to you because I honestly just have no words.
I'm just gonna try and ignore you. I just can't.
Also, any video that I mentioned in this video will be linked below in the description. Probably should have mentioned that earlier. Do you know what I do have words for though? How they treat IG-11 in this season, because oh boy, is it a doozy. So IG-11, right? Cool droid, befriended Mando and Grogu in the first season and sacrificed himself to save them. All fine and dandy. Well, in this season we see Mando try to revive him from the parts that were salvaged. To do this, he enlists the help of some members of the same species as Babu Frick.
That's no good, I need this one. This one is my friend.
They're not friends anymore.
Ah, it's nice to see these guys again. The first attempt does not go smoothly.
Now that's using your head.
That's a totally normal way to talk about your dead friend, but don't worry, it gets worse. Later in the season, they say that they can restore IG-11's physical functionality, but they can't restore his memory. So they decide to turn him into a walking puppet for Grogu to mess with.
Yes, 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 yes.
What are you doing? Hey, Grogu, no. Give it no.
There's something particularly ghoulish about seeing what is essentially the walking corpse of a character be used by his alleged friends as essentially a meat puppet for comedic effect. But don't worry guys, the IG-11 is totally fine by the end of the show. I guess they figured out how to fix his memory even though they said they couldn't do that. And this totally erases how they desecrated his remains. Jesus Christ. On the note of Mando, he's just super unlikable this season. I mean, no one is particularly likable except the Babu Fricks, but he gets it worse than anyone else. In previous seasons, he had a distrustful, slightly clueless air to him, but he was still competent, smart, driven, and fiercely caring for Grogu and those who he considered his friends. Here though, he's an idiot and at times kind of a bully. The clueless parenting is on another level. He is impressively callous to basically everyone except Grogu, who has been drained of basically all of his personality outside of cute kid. Ugh. Now, there were some good parts to this season. As always, the score is wonderful. There are cool alien designs, like this pirate captain guy, that are captured with great practical and digital effects. The performances are still mostly good, with the standouts being Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan, Emily Swallow as the Armorer, and of course Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon. I'm struggling to find a lot of other positives. I suppose I'll just follow the pattern I've been on and talk about the finale last. A finale that is noticeable because I remember nothing of what actually happened in it, despite last seeing the show less than 3 months ago. I thought that I remembered Paz Vizsla, a character who was conveniently built up a lot in this season, dying, but it turns out that was actually the episode before the finale. So, a lot of things happen in this finale. Lots of fighting, Gideon clones himself a bunch, stormtroopers with Mandalorian armor, Gideon gets wanded. Mando retires to a house by a pond. I don't know, man. I just lost any sense of investment by this point. This is honestly the most disappointing one. Book of Boba Fett was annoying, but at least it was its own completely separate thing that ruined itself. This season took one of the most promising and fun shows of this era of Star Wars, and it just kinda ruined it. It's not an explosive failure either. It's not a train wreck. It just kind of lost it, and it flailed around as it slowly died.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up.
I don't know, it's just kind of depressing. I mean, at least I hear Ahsoka's good. That might change in a couple of weeks, but hey, it's something. Sorry to leave this on such a downer note, but it's just how I feel. I don't really think that outside of Andor Season 2, there's a lot to look forward to with live-action Disney Plus Star Wars shows. It feels like it started out so promising, but then just lost its way. I don't even really have a fun counter arc for this section like I did with the last video and the SNL skits. It seems as though the TV side of this whole thing is just hopeless. Or is it? Thank you so much for watching this video. If my calculations are right, this will end up being my longest video ever. And honestly, I'm really proud of how it's turned out. It will probably take another year for part 3 to come out, to be 100% honest, if not more. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on that one, and I need to watch all of Clone Wars and Rebels before I even start. And before all of that, I need a break from Star Wars for a bit. This has just been my life for the last 2 months. Thank you to all the patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to join my Patreon, you can do so with the link down below, and then you can get early access to all of my videos, as well as just the ability to vote on future video topics and get your name on the end screen of all of my videos. It also just further supports me and the channel and makes it that little bit more likely that I can do this for a career. If you can't or don't want to do that though, that's totally okay. You can still show your support by liking the video, commenting any thoughts you may or may not have had, sharing with anyone you think might like it, or even just subscribing to see more of that sweet, sweet content. I sincerely hope I made your day just that little bit better, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Oh my God. What is that?
I don't know.
Alan, grab it. Grab it.
I'm not gonna grab that.
Grab it now.
You grab it.
Get it now!